What I'm going to do now, if you've just got a few minutes, I'm going to ask you some fixed questions that we ask a few people, and they're just kind of standard questions that people get to know you with. If there's one person, living or dead, who would you want to interview more than anybody? And if so, who and why?
I'm actually taking an online course on Beethoven right now. And it's through Stanford. It's kind of like, adult ed type class. And it was supposed to be physical. And when this whole thing started and everyone's starting to get in shelter in place, the professor was way ahead of everybody and sending out a note saying, hey, these are super trying times, but if the composer could suffer the most devastating loss any musician could ever have in deafness and still create his best works, we can at least do, a Zoom class. So I'm studying Beethoven. He's super fascinating. So I'd love to interview him if I could.
What is the book or books that have changed how you view the world, and how so? And also, what are you reading right now?
I decided with this hopefully rare opportunity to have months of kind of a different lifestyle. I'm rereading War and Peace, which is about a scourge that swept over the world called Napoleon. And it seemed apropos to our war that we're at with this little virus that we're battling.
And are you struggling through it? Are you finding it relatively easy read? Because it's notoriously difficult read being so long.
Yeah, so I have learned from past attempts, and I have a printout of all the principal characters and all their patronymics and nicknames and everything. And I refer to that like every 10 seconds. And it's still super confusing to remember who everybody is. But I'm endeavoring to just kind of get some momentum and make sure I just plow through it.
As an individual and a leader in your field, how do you stay engaged and relevant in a world that's moving so quickly?
Wow. So these days, actually, there is a potential for like over stimulus, right? Like there's so much information and it's all so important, and it's a lot of it's hugely distressing. And so the one thing I am actually trying to do is essentially limit my intake of kind of just general news, like, normal news, to only a couple periods per day. And one of the things I did to kind of get some space to actually think without all this white noise just like reverberating is I did just block out like 3 days to write our investor letter a week or two ago, where I essentially tried to not read or talk to or get involved with anybody else and just actually be able to think. And that would be my only advice for everyone these days is there's so much stimulation. A lot of it's really distressing. Obviously, we're all worried about our own physical and mental health, our kids, our community, is to try and block out time, big chunks of time, 4 hours, 6 hours or whatever, where you can just think and not like basically stop the input of stimulus and, potentially just create a space for your brain to stop, throbbing from all this input of data and to see if you can process what you already have in your head.
Yeah, I found that really hard for the first week of shelter in place because my wife's not here, so I'm on my own at the moment. So she comes this weekend because I think she had COVID and she's in Grand Cayman. So I'm here. And so you just spend everything. I'm my Bloomberg, Twitter, email, news sites. And after a while, I'm like, stop. You have to carve up your day differently and change because it's just overwhelming.
Yeah, the other thing I'm trying to do is put some structure, back into life because, in the normal world, our lives are probably overly structured. But in this new world where like everything that you had planned's been canceled, you can easily kind of have it drift. So I'm trying to, have a very structured day where, I kind of do the same things at the same times, to try and get that rhythm back, I think, humans and all animals have their own circadian rhythms that need to kind of stay in tune.
Some of our guests can tie their success to one key breakthrough. Did you experience a tipping point in your career?
I'd say my experience in Tiger Management was just a huge transformative thing for me because I came in having run a hedge fund before Tiger, which I think was unique at the time. And, I'd learned a few things kind of on my own, experimenting with, successes and failures. But getting to work with Julian Robertson and 40 other really smart, nice people, was such a boost to my career. And, I've learned a ton from the lessons, that all these peers of mine gave me.
Did Julian ever get involved in Bitcoin?
He has. He's a very forward-thinking man, and many years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, he invested in our funds, and then coincidentally, my son actually goes to the school Julie went to in the 50s, and so I've seen him there, and he's up on stuff.
Good man. Can you identify a failure that had the most significant impact on your career, and what did you do to overcome it?
Oh, actually, it's a good story. It's quite germane to our current environment. So I started out, as I mentioned, I was an asset-backed securities trader at Goldman in the 80s, and the Wall Street stock market crash happened, and like Salomon cut their entire muni department, and everyone was cutting. And so they said they had to cut the department by 20% or something. And they were thinking about laying me off. And I was like, what? That's outrageous. Because I'd just been sitting there, but I really hadn't been learning. I was just kind of sitting around, playing liar's poker with the other guys on the desk and Steve Mnuchin and all that. And I really wasn't stressed in my training. I wasn't stretching myself. I wasn't really doing anything. So I quickly grabbed the phone and I was looking for that headhunter's number for the job that had offered me 6 times or whatever I was making. And, I went and switched. I went to Bankers Trust, and it was awesome because having kind of gotten thrown out of a really comfy situation, and it just kind of kicked me into gear. And I realized I should just put myself out there, right? And just go for it. And since then, I've been just, kind of putting my whole heart and soul into everything I'm doing. And especially, with blockchain, it's the same. I think we're going to make a lot of money in this business, but I'm passionate. We're actually changing the world, right? 20 years from now, we're going to look back and blockchain is going to have improved a ton of people's lives. And it was basically, getting kicked out of my comfy, gig forced me to kind of actually get engaged and get going. And that'd be my advice for, graduates that are potentially going to have their jobs pulled from them now is dislocation might be the best thing that ever happened to you. And just embrace it and be open to it. And my son showed me this great clip from The Rock about him getting cut from the NFL. And, that was the best thing that ever happened to him. And, that would be the spirit I would be looking at this.
Absolutely. Okay, last 2 questions. Who's a person you admire and why?
Oh, there's a lot of people. But the one that's relevant to this conversation is, and I know it sounds trite, but it's actually a super earnest thought, Satoshi Nakamoto. And the reason I say it is I'm just not aware of anyone else that's ever contributed something of such incredible value to the world. Blockchain's 200 billion, as you say, and not taking anything for themselves. It's amazing that the open source code was just contributed to the world. It wasn't patented. And even the 1 million Bitcoins that Satoshi owns, he or she or whatever, hasn't sold or done anything with them in many, many years. So, I think that's inspirational. Again, if it's true that blockchain actually improves people's lives, then I think it's going to have a huge impact on people. It's just really cool that Satoshi essentially gifted that to humanity. And I think it's great.
Final question. What view do you hold that's most controversial in your professional life?
I would say my views right now are not 8 Sigma outside consensus, but the views that I expressed earlier that this is actually a great time to invest in venture, might sound self-serving or it might sound, kind of knee-jerk reaction, but I hold it very sincerely. And that's one I think most people probably wouldn't vote with their checkbooks to agree with me on. So, that would be the one I would say is the most controversial relative to the professional community.
Perfect. Dan, listen, thank you ever so much. It was really good. I thoroughly enjoyable and lots for people to get their teeth into as well. I think it was really great to tie up your macro experience and your understanding now. Kind of you've let back into macro world just to try and make sense of what this all means, because you kind of have the intuition that this is going to mean a lot for your current life in terms of, the assets that you look at. And I think that's fascinating.
Well, Raoul, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure being with you in these trying times.